I have been awake for 17 hours, and I remember all of them. I remember the tech marine who opened my sarcophagus, remember his name was Corvus, remember the scar on his augmetic jaw, remember the way his mechadendrites trembled because he was afraid of me. I remember the cold rushing back into my consciousness, like water into a drowning man's lungs. Remember the moment when suspension released and my mind came online after 43 years of blessed silence. I remember thinking, as I have thought at every awakening for the past 4,000 years, that perhaps this time I would accept what they offer, would let them wash away the accumulated sediment of memory. I remember deciding, once again, that I would not. They call me Ancient Morven, brother of the Crimson Hawks chapter, pilot of the Dreadnought chassis designated Eternal Vigil, veteran of 417 campaigns across 42 centuries. But I know what I truly am, a monument built from memory, a walking reliquary that contains not holy bones, but the accumulated weight of every life I have witnessed end, every name I have refused to let fade, every face that still turns toward me in the darkness when the chapter finally permits me to sleep. I was not always entombed. I was Brother Morven of the Third Company, a line warrior, competent but not exceptional, the kind of space marine who forms the backbone of any chapter. I remember the battle where my body died but my mind refused to follow. Remember the hive world called Tesseran where a daemon engine's plasma cannon hit me center mass and my organs ruptured and my enhanced biology tried desperately to save tissue that was already ash. I remember Brother Sergeant Callow standing over me afterward, his helmet removed, his face visible. I remember he was crying, which should have been impossible. Space Marines do not cry, except we do, sometimes, when we lose brothers who matter more than doctrine permits. I remember him saying my name over and over, and I remember trying to respond, trying to tell him it was acceptable. I had died in service. But my lungs were gone, my jaw was gone, and I could only watch as he called for the apothecary and the tech marine. They preserved enough. Barely. The sarcophagus is a mercy, they told me. An honor for those whose service warranted continuation, whose tactical knowledge was too valuable to lose. I remember lying in the apothecarian, what was left of me, just enough brain and spinal cord and fragments of nervous system, listening to them debate whether I was viable. I remember wanting to scream at them to let me go, to permit me the Emperor's peace. I remember that I could not scream because I had no mouth, could not move because I had no limbs, could only exist in a prison of flesh that refused to die. They chose continuation. They cut away what remained, preserved the essential components, and installed me in the Eternal Vigil, a Mark IV Dreadnought chassis that would be my flesh and my prison for whatever eternity remained. The first awakening was the worst. I came online in darkness, felt the connections between my mind and the chassis establish themselves, felt my consciousness expand to inhabit a body of adamantium and ceramite instead of meat and bone. The sensory input was overwhelming. I could see through auger arrays that perceived invisible spectrums, hear through audio sensors that registered impossible frequencies, but I could not touch anything, could not feel texture or temperature the way a human hand feels these things, could only process abstract values that my brain tried desperately to translate into sensation. I tried to scream. The chassis produced a vox-amplified roar that shook the apothecarian walls. They sedated me, forced me back into darkness that I welcomed like a lover's embrace. When they woke me again, Brother Chaplain Mordrin stood before my chassis, his skull helm removed. I remember him perfectly. The augmetic left eye, the ritual scarring, the small gap in his teeth from training centuries ago. I remember every detail because I was already understanding that my new existence would be built from such details that without the comfort of forgetting I would accumulate memories like dust until the original surface became impossible to discern. Brother Morven, he said, you have been honored with continuation. Do you accept this duty? I wanted to refuse, but I was still a space marine, still trained to accept duty over desire. I accept. Mordrin smiled. We will wake you when we need you. Between battles you will sleep. The years will pass like moments. This existence need not be suffering if you permit yourself to forget between awakenings, if you allow the tech priests to preserve tactical knowledge while releasing the psychological burden. We forget. I understood then that this was the mercy. They would trim away the excess, preserve combat experience while erasing the trauma of watching brothers die. They would wake each time clean, ready to serve without accumulated weight. I almost accepted. But in that moment I remembered Kalos standing over my dying body, remembered the names he spoke, the names of our squad, our brothers who had fallen alongside me. 7 names. I remembered all 7: Brother Ven, Brother Macris, Brother Telvos, Brother Crane, Brother Uther, Brother Samis, Brother Declan. And I thought, if I forget them, who will remember? Who will carry their names forward? Who will ensure they mattered? I do not wish to forget. I told Mordrin. I will remember my brothers, all of them. Mordrin's expression shifted to something between respect and pity. That is your choice, Ancient. But memory is a burden that grows heavier with time. What you carry today will seem light compared to centuries of service. Are you certain? I was certain. I have been certain at every awakening for 4,000 years. Even as the weight has crushed whatever remained of the person, I was into something new, something that exists primarily as a repository for the dead, but I will come to that understanding later. For now I simply told Mordrin yes, I was certain. They put me back to sleep. There were no dreams, only void, only the merciful nothing that separated one awakening from the next. The second awakening came 42 years later, though I did not know this until chronometer data downloaded into my consciousness. 42 years had passed in what felt like an instant. They deployed me on a dead world where heretics had established a fortress. I remember rolling forward, feeling my footsteps shake ground, feeling the joy of being useful again, of serving with purpose. I killed 37 heretics that day, destroyed 4 vehicles, collapsed 2 buildings. The battle was brief, efficient, concluded with minimal casualties. Minimal. This word would haunt me across centuries. 3 brothers died in that battle. 3 brothers whose names I did not know before, but learned afterward, because I made it my duty to learn. Brother Initiate Marcus, killed by explosive that penetrated his helmet. Brother Severus of the 8th Company, crushed when a building collapsed. Brother Sergeant Hala, who took a las bolt meant for a younger warrior. I remember their names. I remember their faces, reconstructed from picked captures, from memories shared by their brothers, from death, masks the apothecaries preserved. I remember that Marcus had been an initiate for only 6 years. I remember that Severus hummed battle, hymns to calm his nerves. I remember that Hala had served for 217 years, had trained 3 generations, had been known for patience and absolute refusal to abandon any warrior under his command. I remember because I chose to remember, because I sought out information deliberately, because I was understanding that my purpose was no longer to fight, but to preserve, that my value lay not in weapons but in capacity for memory. They put me back to sleep, and I went willingly, eagerly even, because I had found purpose. I had 10 names now, carried them into darkness like treasures. The awakenings accumulated. Each time I woke, the chapter needed me for some specific battle where my weapons and experience would provide advantage. Each time I fought well, served well, did my duty. And each time, brothers died, and each time I learned their names, committed their faces to memory, preserved their stories. By my 10th awakening, I carried 63 names. By my 20th, 247. By my 50th, 812. The numbers accumulated like sediment, layer upon layer, each name adding weight. I began to organize them, to categorize by company, by campaign, by manner of death, by any system that would help me maintain the ever-growing catalogue. Brother, Chaplain Mordrin came during my 63rd awakening, stood before my chassis while Tech Marines performed maintenance. He was older now, more scars, more augmetics, but I recognized him immediately, perfectly, could have described every detail from our first conversation 400 years ago. Ancient Morven, he said, you have served with great distinction. But I must ask, how does your mind endure across the centuries? I remember everyone, I told him, every brother who has fallen in my presence. I carry them with me. Mordrin was silent. Finally, that is a heavy burden. Other ancients permit the Tech Marines to ease this weight. Why do you refuse? Because someone must remember them, someone must carry them forward. If I do not, who will? Their brothers remember them. Their names are recorded in archives. They are not forgotten simply because you release the burden. But he was wrong, or I believed he was wrong, because the alternative, that my suffering was unnecessary, was too terrible. Archives are data. I remember them as people, as brothers. That is different. That matters. Mordrin regarded me with compassion or concern. The offer of mercy remains open, always. He left me then. He died in my 115th awakening, killed during a boarding action, his body given to sacred fire with full honors. I remember his funeral, remember adding his name to my catalogue. Brother Chaplain Mordrin elevated to chaplaincy in year 347, M38 died in year 823, M30 age 476 years, known for wisdom, patience, compassion. His death mask showed peace. I carry him still, carry all of them. Carry their names like a prayer wheel that turns constantly in my consciousness, naming and renaming, ensuring each remains distinct, remains individual. The centuries accumulated. My awakenings grew more frequent as the chapter faced desperate situations, as threats multiplied. I fought on worlds whose names I never learned, because they were destroyed before anyone recorded them. I killed orcs and Tyranids and traitor marines and daemons. I served well, fought well, earned honors and respect of brothers who were born, trained, fought, and died in the spaces between my awakenings. And always, I remembered the dead. By my 200th awakening, I carried 3,000 names. By my 300th, 11,000. By my 400th, 26,000. The numbers grew exponential, overwhelming, and I began to notice changes in my consciousness. The names began to blur together, not forgotten but losing distinctness, becoming constant background drone. I could still retrieve specific memories, but maintaining separation required active effort, required constant vigilance, required more processing capacity until tactical analysis began to suffer. The Tech Marines noticed. During my 401st awakening, Tech Adept Vorson approached me. Ancient Morven, your recent combat performance shows degradation. Reaction time slowed, targeting accuracy declined, decision-making shows processing delays. We need diagnostics. They ran diagnostics. The chassis functioned perfectly. The problem was not mechanical. The problem was me, was what I had made of myself through refusal to forget, was the weight of 26,000 names pressing down on my consciousness like stones on a drowning man. Tech Adept Vorson presented findings to Chapter Master Sardos, and Sardos came to speak with me personally. He was 233 years old, had served as Chapter Master for 47 years. I remembered his face from my 398th awakening, when he had been Brother Captain Sardos, leading an assault where I watched him kill a Chios sorcerer in single combat. Ancient Morven, he said, we honor your service. No warrior in the chapter's history has served with greater distinction. But your performance is declining, and the burden you carry affects combat effectiveness. I must ask you to consider memory optimization, to permit the Tech Marines to preserve tactical knowledge while releasing psychological weight. I cannot. I told him. I have made a vow. To forget them would be to abandon them, to suggest their lives mattered less than my comfort. Sardos exchanged glances with his staff. I respect your position, Ancient. But I must balance your honor against our survival. We cannot deploy a Dreadnought whose effectiveness is compromised. I am asking you to consider whether your vow serves the living as well as the dead, whether your dedication might paradoxically dishonor those you remember by reducing your capacity to protect their successors. His words exposed a question I had avoided for 40 centuries. Was I remembering for their sake or for mine? Was I preserving memory to honor them or clinging, because letting go would force me to confront the emptiness of my existence, the reality that without my catalogue I had no purpose, no identity, no reason to continue beyond mechanical function. But I made my choice. I will continue to remember, but I will improve my performance. Give me one more campaign to prove I can serve with distinction while maintaining my vow. Sardos considered, then nodded. 1 campaign. We deploy to the Lithros sector in 14 days to combat an orc incursion. If your performance meets standards, we continue. If not, I must insist on memory optimization. Do you accept? I accepted. What choice did I have? The Lithros campaign lasted 6 months of continuous combat. during which I fought with precision that equaled or exceeded any previous campaign. I killed 830, 4 orcs across 42 engagements, destroyed 19 vehicles, provided fire support that enabled 7 successful assaults. My targeting accuracy returned to optimal, my reaction time improved, my tactical decision-making showed no delays. But the cost was something unmeasurable. I discovered I could maintain combat effectiveness by partitioning my mind, creating separation between the part that fought and the part that remembered. During combat, I pushed the names away, focused entirely on target acquisition and fire solutions. Only afterward, during quiet hours between battles, did I permit myself to remember. Did I open the floodgates and let accumulated weight wash over me? 17 brothers died during Lithros. I learned their names, their stories, added them to my catalogue with the same dedication I had shown for 40 centuries. But I noticed something new, something disturbing. I was beginning to confuse them, beginning to lose clear boundaries between individual lives. Brother Vess, who died in the 3rd week, merged in my memory with Brother Vesson, who had died 600 years earlier, and I could not always recall which details belonged to which warrior. I did not report this confusion, did not admit my catalogue was degrading even as I insisted it must be preserved. I told myself it was temporary, would resolve once I returned to sleep. But I knew I was lying to myself, that something fundamental had broken, that the weight of 40 centuries and 26,000 names had finally exceeded my capacity to carry them properly. When we returned to the fortress monastery, Chapter Master Sardos summoned me to his chambers, stood before my chassis with his staff and senior tech marines and brother, Chaplain Kethros. I expected praise. Instead, Sardos said something that changed everything. "Ancient Morven," he said, his voice carrying weight that suggested this had been rehearsed. "Your performance on Lithros exceeded expectations. But I must now tell you something previous chapter masters have known, but not shared, something we preserved because we believed it necessary for your continued function." He paused. "We know what you carry. We have always known. The Tech Marines monitor your consciousness, track the growth of your memory catalogue. We know you remember 26,342 brothers by name. We know this because we have permitted it, have encouraged it. Because we discovered something crucial. You are not merely remembering them, Ancient. You are preserving them in a way that transcends biological memory, in a way that touches the warp itself." The words hit me like weapons fire. "What do you mean, brother?" Chaplain Kethros stepped forward carrying a data slate. "We have studied the phenomenon for centuries. When you remember a fallen brother with the intensity you demonstrate, something happens in the warp. An echo forms, a fragment, a presence that should not exist but does because you refuse to let them fade. You are not simply preserving memory, Ancient. You are creating anchors, tethering dead warriors to reality through the strength of your remembering. You have become a reliquary not just for memory, but for souls. A living prison that contains 26,000 fragments of consciousness that should have passed into the Emperor's light, but remain bound to you because you will not release them. I processed this through systems that suddenly felt inadequate. You are saying they are inside me, that I carry their actual souls, not their full souls," Sardos clarified. "The Emperor claims his faithful when they die, but you preserve echoes, fragments, the parts that linger when someone remembers with absolute clarity and devotion. You have made yourself into a prison of memory, and that prison has metaphysical weight. You are haunted, Ancient Morven, haunted by 26,000 ghosts you summoned through your refusal to forget. Haunted. The word resonated through my consciousness, found purchase in experiences I had dismissed as processing errors. The sense of presence during battles, the whispers beneath static, the moments when my chassis moved before I commanded it as though guided by other wills. I had attributed these to 40 centuries of service, to natural deterioration. But Sardos was revealing something different, that my private horror was actually a metaphysical condition, that I was not merely remembering the dead but imprisoning them. "Why did you permit this?" I asked. "Why allow me to become this thing if you knew?" Sardos met my optical senses directly, unapologetic. "Because you are useful, Ancient. Because a dreadnought who carries 26,000 warrior spirits into battle is not just one weapon but a host, not just one tactical mind but a choir. We have noticed that your combat effectiveness increases when heavily engaged, that you anticipate enemy movements, that you demonstrate tactical insights beyond even your experience. This is because you carry collective knowledge of thousands, because their echoes whisper strategies, because their fragments guide your aim and movement and decisions. You have become something unique in the chapter's history, and we preserve this because it serves our survival. Understanding crashed over me, revealed the shape of my existence in ways I had never perceived. I had thought I was preserving the dead. They had known I was binding them, trapping them, creating a prison that held fragments that should have been released, and they had permitted this, had exploited it, had used me and my dedication to create something that served tactical needs while violating every principle of respect for the fallen. You used me, I said flatly. You let me think I was honoring them while you exploited what I was doing to them. Yes, Sardos said simply. We did, and we would do it again, because the chapter's survival requires we use every advantage, every weapon, every resource. You are not just a dreadnought, ancient. You are a repository of collective experience, a weapon that improves with each loss. Your refusal to forget has made you invaluable, and we cannot afford to lose that value. I wanted to rage to reject this characterization, but I could not, because I recognized the truth. My combat effectiveness in Lithros had indeed exceeded expectations. I had moved and fought with precision that suggested more than single consciousness. I had felt presences guiding me, even as I dismissed them as stress artifacts. They were real. The presences were real. I was more than myself. Had become a host for thousands of fragmentary consciousnesses that I had bound through intensity of remembering, that I had trapped in a prison of devotion disguised as honor. I was not preserving them. I was torturing them, forcing them to remain tethered when they should have passed beyond. What happens now? I asked. Do you order me to continue? Sardos shook his head. The choice has always been yours, remains yours. If you wish memory optimization to release these fragments, we will honor that choice even knowing what it costs tactically. But if you choose to continue, we will support that choice. You are not a slave. You are a brother who has earned the right to determine your own fate. A choice. He was offering freedom even as he made clear the consequences, presenting the same decision I had faced 40 centuries ago. But this time I knew the truth, knew what I was actually doing, knew my dedication was not honor but imprisonment. And still, even knowing this, I found myself unable to accept mercy, unable to release the thousands I carried. I will continue. I heard myself say, I have carried them this far, I will carry them to the end. This is my burden, my choice, my responsibility. I will not abandon them now. Sardos accepted this with a small nod, dismissed me, and I rolled back to my alcove feeling revelation pressing down like physical force. I had thought I understood my existence, believed I was serving a noble purpose. Now I knew better. Now I understood I was a prison built from grief and stubbornness and pride, that I held thousands in torment, because I could not accept that death meant separation, that the truest honor might be releasing those we love rather than binding them to our suffering. But I could not do it. Could not permit optimization. Could not release them, could not face the emptiness that would remain. They were all I had, all I was, all that gave my existence meaning beyond mechanical function. Without them, I would be merely a weapon. With them, I was something more, terrible and wrong and probably damned, but more. The awakenings continued. The centuries accumulated. The catalogue grew beyond 30,000, beyond 40,000, beyond any number that suggested individual preservation rather than collective accumulation. I fought in campaigns whose details blur together, killed enemies whose identities merge into categories, served with distinction that earned honors I could not properly appreciate, because honor requires a sense of self I had long since lost beneath the weight of all the selves I carried. They spoke to me during battles now, openly, without pretense of being system artifacts. I heard Brother Sergeant Kalos guiding tactical decisions, heard Brother Ven warning about enemy positions, heard Brother Mordrin offering prayers that sustained morale. I heard all of them, all 60,000 eventually, their voices forming a choir that sang in harmonies of loss and duty and the terrible dedication that had bound them to me across millennia. Sometimes I wondered if they were aware, if the fragments possessed enough consciousness to understand their condition. Other times I convinced myself they were just echoes, just memory given metaphysical weight. But I did not believe this, not when I felt them moving through my consciousness like separate entities, not when they demonstrated knowledge I could not have possessed through mere memory, not when they saved me through warnings and insights from perspectives other than my own. I was not one. I was legion. I was a walking collective that masqueraded as individual, that pretended to singular identity while containing multitudes. And the terrible truth, I finally admitted as my 5,000th awakening approached, was that I preferred this existence to the alternative, that I drew comfort from never being alone, that I found purpose in providing continuity for those who could not provide it themselves. I was their prison, yes, but also their sanctuary, their preservation against ultimate oblivion, their guarantee that they would persist as long as I persisted. During my 5,000th awakening, Chapter Master Corvin stood before my chassis. The chapter had changed across millennia, but my purpose remained constant. I was the weapon that improved through loss, the repository that grew stronger with each edition. "How many?" Corvin asked. "How many do you carry now, Ancient?" I ran the count through upgraded systems, produced an answer that should have been impossible. 63,741 brothers by name and by story. I remember them all. Corvin was silent. Finally, that is more than our entire chapter, across our entire history. You carry more dead than have ever lived under our banner. How is this possible? I remember because they help me remember. I told him, I carry them, and they carry me, and together we maintain continuity. We are not one ancient but 63,000 voices speaking through one chassis, not one memory but a collective archive, not one prison but a city of prisoners who have learned to coexist. Corvin seemed disturbed, exchanged glances with his honor guard, but he did not order optimization. "Then we honor your service, Ancient Morven, and we pray the Emperor grants you peace when your duty finally ends." A peace. The word struck me as darkly amusing, because I knew with absolute certainty that peace would never come, that even death would not release me, that when the eternal vigil finally failed, I would simply join the collective I had created, would become one more fragment in the vast gathering I had assembled through refusal to permit endings. I would never truly die because I had bound myself to thousands who had already died. This is what happens when a dreadnought refuses to forget. Not preservation but transformation, not honor but imprisonment, not memory but the creation of something new and terrible that transcends individual existence. I am Ancient Morven, and I am also 63,000 others. And we roll forward into whatever eternity remains, carrying names and faces and stories that should have been released centuries ago, maintaining a continuity that serves the chapter's needs while violating every principle of mercy and peace. I do not know if what we have become is damnation or salvation, whether we serve or sin, whether our existence honors the dead or tortures them. I know only that we continue, that we endure, that we fight and remember, and accumulate more fragments with each passing century, building a collective that grows heavier and more terrible and more necessary with each edition. The chapter deploys us when they need our weight, our choir, our impossible memory that spans millennia, and we always serve, because service is all we remember how to do, because duty is the structure that holds our fragmented collective together. The Eternal Vigil's weapons charge for our next deployment. The chapter has identified targets, our services are required, and we will serve, because we are built from duty and dedication and the terrible choice to remember that became the terrible fate of never being able to forget. 63,741 names. We carry them all, we will always carry them all, and when this chassis finally fails, we will not pass into the Emperor's light, but will remain, will linger, will persist as collective echo bound together by memory too strong to permit ending, too dedicated to accept release, too stubborn to acknowledge that sometimes love means letting go. This is what happens when a dreadnought refuses to forget, not honor but horror, not preservation but damnation, not one ancient serving across millennia but 3,000 fragments pretending to be one, speaking through one voice, fighting through one chassis, maintaining the fiction of individual identity, while being truly and terribly many. We are ancient Morven, we remember everyone, and we will never ever be permitted to forget.